Okay, okay, we're back. We are back, and Gail is here. Okay, good morning again. I hope everyone had a nice Hanukkah and we're ready. Like, wow, it's the middle of December, which is pretty. I can't believe it. Anyway, so next Tuesday is Asara B'Teves. I hope to still give the shiur, even though I will not have had my morning coffee, so I may not be as chipper as you might like. But it also happens to be that it's my father's first yahrzeit, so Dafka, we're definitely going to learn, and I'm also, just to let you know, that on Monday night, we're going to have a special yahrzeit shiur. We'll be in person and on Zoom. So I'll just send out the information. So after Marav, here we done Marav 6:45, and then Monday night at 7, I'll give a shiur. So God willing. Somebody is on as me. I don't know who that is. It must be, I don't know, that it must be my boss. I'm not sure. Or maybe it's Shelly's impersonating me again. It could be. So what I want to do, I want to look at some of the psukim. This is I hope everybody got the link. I sent that. I made a sheet. I'll put it on the screen if you want later when we get to it. But the sequence of events here is very, very dramatic. Let's put it that way. You might call Parshas Vayigash the most dramatic parsha in Bereshis. I mean, after all, the brothers come head to head finally, and not in a nice way. And Yehuda is about to wage battle, as we'll see. And then finally, Yosef says, "Oh yeah, by the way, Ani Yosef Od Avichai. I am Joseph. How you doing?" So he says, "I am Yosef. I'm your brother. What's going on?" And here we go. So we have to look at some of the events leading up to what took place right in the beginning of our parsha. So Yosef, in last week's parsha, as we saw with the dreams, he gets promoted to the viceroy in Egypt, and he not only that, but he takes care of the issue of the famine. And as they have the 7 years of plenty, and he stores, and he taxes, and he's this, he's an economic whiz of sorts, and he's able to save the land of Egypt. And it comes to a point where the brothers come down. Of course, the brothers come down, and they do not know who Joseph is, but he sure as heck knows who they are. And then he starts playing games with them. Okay, so then he starts asking them about their brother, and who do you have there, and he says. It says, and the pasuk says he remembers his dreams, and then he says to them, "You've come to be meraglim, you're spies of some sort." Now, the question is always, what would you do if you were in Joseph's position? Would you be so magnanimous as to put the family back together? I don't know. I don't think I would, but because there's no fight like a family fight, as we say. And some say he went through all these machinations so that the dreams could come true. Okay. I don't really want to focus on that. We're going to just look at sort of a sequence of events and a very interesting insight from the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, which gives us an interpretation of the Pesukim, transitioning from last week's Parsha to this week's Parsha. And we also see something which we have not seen before, which maybe is part of what changes Yosef's attitude towards him. Maybe it's something he was looking for. Is there any regret on the part of the brothers? Do they have any remorse for their actions? So if you look on page 234, 235 in the stone, so it's chapter 42. We're in Perek Mem Beis, the beginning of the 5th Aliyah, let's say. So, they go, and he's asking about their family, and then it says on the 3rd day, Yosef says in the 3rd day, do this and live. Like, he's like, I think you guys are spies. You're trying to trick me. You're trying to do something. Here's what you want to do. He says, I fear God. If you're truthful, let one of your brothers stay in prison while you go and you bring food back home to your father, and then bring the youngest brother. And then I'll know that you're telling the truth. Okay, so he imprisons Shimon, and he said he holds him almost as ransom or as collateral or as security deposit, whatever you want to call it. And this is what they did. So look at the very next page. It's also nice the way the stone lays it out. It's the next page. It's kind of in suspense. And look what they say. Vayomru ish el achiv aval ashemim anachnu al achinu asher ra'inu tzaras nafsho v'hischanenu elenu v'lo shamanu akein ba'a elenu hatzara hazos. So they said to one another, yeah, we're guilty. Shemim anachnu. We have sinned concerning our brother. Now, okay. Before you read further, stop reading. Don't read. Look at me. Eyes on me. So what should the next sentence be? We have sinned regarding our brother that we fill in the blank.
We sold him.
Sold him, killed him. I mean, or, they Miriam says killed because for all they know, he's dead or we caused his death. Now, remember, we studied that maybe they didn't actually sell him, but certainly what they did led him to being sold. There's no question about that. Okay. So what do they say? Look what they say, though. We are guilty, and as much as we saw his heartfelt anguish when he pleaded with us and we paid no heed. That's why this anguish has come upon us. Not that we got rid of him, not that he might be dead because of our actions, but when he was kicking and screaming when we're throwing him in the pit, we didn't listen. Which, obviously, the point is there that ultimately we, whatever happened to him. But in other words, we did something wrong for what we did to our brother. But it's almost like we were so heartless that while he's screaming, and the Torah even goes out of its way in Parshas Vayeshev to say how heartless they are, because it says that when they finished Vayeshu Lecha Lecha, they sat down to eat. You imagine, we always, we discussed this last week or the week before that, when it's very hard I've found it for the moms. I had no problem sleeping, like letting the kids fall asleep, to ferberize them. Remember that term? To ferberize. I had no problem. I could let them scream for hours. No problem. Like I could sleep. My wife, oh, God bless her. She couldn't get she was like, no, she couldn't, like the screaming. I can't take it. Oh my God. So she would ask, like, when I'm home alone with the babies, like, how did you do? I'm like, they're fine. She's like, really? I'm like, I don't know. Shut off the monitor. Right. So that's one way to do it. Just shut off the monitor. So, anyway, so they sat down to eat. He's screaming his head off. So it could be they were a distance away, whatever it is. But they say that here. And look at the reaction of Yosef. No, first, I'm sorry. Before we get to Yosef, we have Reuven comes in, Fredo. Okay, even though he's the firstborn. So we're on page 236, Aline. We could see Aline is here. We wish her Mazel Tov on her daughter's recent marriage. Mazel Tov. Beautiful. Huh? You what?
It'd be good if my boss didn't call as I was speaking.
Oh, okay. So the boss. I'll send him a note. Okay. So Vayan Reuven Osam Lemor. Reuven says not Osam, but usually it's Vayan Reuven Lemor. Vayan Reuven Osam. Reuven spoke like to them, at them almost. Hello, Amarti Alechem Lemor Al Techatu V'Yelav Lo Shematem V'Gam Dano Hinei Nidrush. Didn't I say? There's nobody loves something more than an I told you so. And he gives a big grand I told you so. Didn't I say to you, don't sin against the boy, but you wouldn't listen? And his blood as well is being avenged. So what's Reuven really doing? Right, exactly. He's washing his hands of it. He's like, which we saw. The question is technically speaking, Reuven should not be held accountable for the sin of selling Joseph because he wasn't there at the time, and he actually did try to stop it, even though he didn't try hard enough or he didn't try well enough. But he wasn't involved, and yet the Chazal always attribute. They say that the 10 martyrs correspond to the 10 sons who sold Joseph. Benjamin was certainly not involved, which we're going to see in a minute. How somebody can get dragged into something. So the Ravina Bachia says that maybe he gets schlepped into the whole thing anyway, or why? So he gives two reasons. He says, why is it 10 versus 10? He says maybe Yosef is one of the 10 involved, that even though he was the victim, but he did cause this to happen. He has a role in it because of the way he tried to lord over his brothers. That's A. And this is Rabbi Bachia in the beginning of Parshas Vayeshev. And B, he says maybe Reuven is actually being punished for a different thing, where he'd said when he switched the beds of his mother and Bilhah, the whole thing, it says Vayishkaves Bilhah, that he slept with Bilhah, but it's a euphemism, whatever. Anyway, he's trying to wash his hands of it and say, and by the way, look at the response that they give Reuven. It's the same response that they always give Reuven, which is no, nothing. Reuven talks, he is not E.F. Hutton. Nobody listens. Okay. So the Psukim will continue. V'heim lo yadu ki shomei Yosef ki melitz bein osam v'yisov me'aleim v'yef v'yashav aleim v'daber aleim ha'meikach min ha'meshimon v'yaser tzaleineihem. Now, they didn't know that Yosef understood. Now, obviously, they don't know it's Yosef, and they have the interpreter, and they're probably speaking. Like when your parents or grandparents used to speak Yiddish when they don't want you to understand something, and that's how you learn Yiddish. Then you learn all the bad ththings. So they don't realize that Yosef understands everything that they're saying, which is a really embarrassing situation to be in, by the way. I remember in our family business, we used to have a family business in downtown Manhattan. So my sister Emily, who, I guess if you looked at her, you wouldn't think that she was be fluent in Hebrew. So when Israelis would come in and they try to and they would talk fluent in Hebrew, and as if she had no clue, and then she would answer them perfect Hebrew, and they'd be floored, because they were saying not nice things about how we're going to cheat this, we're going to do that, So, and then when she was able to answer them, it's just classic stuff. Anyway, so so we see what Yosef does best. First of all, we saw that he uses God. I believe in God. And the other thing that he does is he cries a lot. Yosef cries a lot, and he cries, and he takes Shimon. Fine. So we see that something changes here. They start to show a bit of remorse, and that could be, what's the value of such remorse when you're really in trouble? Does it matter then? Or maybe you should have had remorse the first time. Is that an acceptable level of tshuva? That's an interesting question. Tshuva is tshuva, but does tshuva come only because you're about to get punished, or tshuva because you really feel bad? In other words, do they really feel bad about it, or do they feel bad that they're going to get in trouble for this, or that they're going to have to suffer? They're going to have to go back to the father and say, oh yeah, we lost another one. And we have to bring down the youngest one, which is exactly what happens when they go back. Okay, so they go and they're fully laden. They go back to Yaakov. They say what happens, and they convince Yaakov that he has to send down Binyamin. Chapter 43 is on the bottom of 238. So they finished all the provisions that they had, and they have to go back to Mitzrayim, and Yehuda explains what's going to happen if we don't bring the brother. And finally, he convinces Yehuda, and it's Reuven again, who tries to convince the father, I'll guarantee Binyamin. And he says, if not, you could kill my two older sons.
Can I ask a question?
Rashi points out, yeah.
Why do they have to wait till they finish their provisions? Why aren't they eager to go back and retrieve their brother? Why are they hanging out waiting for their provisions before they return?
Most likely because they don't want to deal with the fact that they have to take Binyamin and handle their father that way. So Reuven says, you could kill my two sons if I don't bring back Binyamin. So Yaakov, Rashi comments, he says, Bechor tipeshu. He says, you doofus. You don't think your sons are not my sons? Not my grandchildren are not my children. So, but yet Yehuda pretty much guarantees the same thing. And Rabbi Schwab in his Sefer and Chumash, he says that there's a difference because Yehuda already knows what it's like to lose two children. If you remember the story of Yehuda and Tamar, Yehuda lost two children, and he can relate to it. So he understands when he says something like that, what it means to lose a child. So he's on a better plane with Yaakov to do that. Okay, fine. So they go and they send him down. It's on page 242, 243. They go down, they take Binyamin, and now they stand before Yosef. Pasuk Tezayin, 16. Yosef sees them, he sees Benjamin. So he says to the one in charge of the house, bring the men into the house. This is what we saw last week. That's the hit of Hanukkah. And we're going to have a big feast. And they brought to Joseph's house. They were frightened because they were at his house. They didn't know what to do. The money were placed in their sacks. So, in other words, they're worried that they're being set up for some sort of charge. And they approach the man who's in charge of Joseph's house. And they said, we came to buy food. But what happened? And then there was money, on and on and on. He's like, don't worry. The God of your father has put a hidden treasure. Your payment has reached me. And he brought Shimon to them. Then he brings them all to sit down to eat. They water, they wash their feet and feed, and they are about to eat. 244, 245. And Yosef comes, right? And he says, how you doing? How's your father Yaakov? Is he still alive? And they said, oh, our father's at peace. He still lives. They bow down. He lifts up and he sees Binyamin, his mother's son, for the first time in a long time. And he says, is this your little brother of whom he spoke to me? he says, God be gracious to you, my son. And by the way, we always have this image of Binyamin being this like 6-year-old. Okay, Binyamin is 30 years old. Binyamin is the father of 10 children, which we learned in this week's Parsha, right? Bela, Vavecher, Vashpel, Gera, Naaman, Echiv, Rosh, Mupim, Upim, Ve'ard. Those are the names of the 10 sons of Binyamin. Now, again, as I say to you every single year, I'll just like saying it happens to be my bar mitzvah Parsha, so I know it. That's what I know exactly. But and each one is named after how much he missed Yosef. But Ben Binyamin is 30 years old. Okay, so he rushed because of the compassion for his brother. Is stirred, and again he wants to cry, so he goes into the other room to cry. He washes his face, he comes out, he gets himself together, and he says, eat. They served, and the Egyptians sit separately from them, and then of course he sits them around the table in age order, and they're looking at like, whoa, how does he know that? Is this guy some sort of clairvoyant? And he has portions, and then Binyamin, he gives 5 times as much as everyone else. They eat, they drink, okay. Chapter 44, and this is the last test, as it says. Then he says, fill the men's sack with as much food as they could take, and put money, etc. And however, take the Kiddush cup, the silver becher, okay, and put it in the sack of Binyamin. So they go off, they leave, they're like relieved probably. Okay, we can go back home. We have Binyamin, everything's fine. And then they left. And then Joseph says to he says, get up and go after them. When you overtake them, you're to say, why do you repay evil for good? Now, by the way, this is also a bit of foreshadowing. People leaving Egypt, and someone in charge of Egypt says, go chase them. Why did they leave? He says, why Lama shilamtam ra'a tachas tova? Why have you repaid evil for good? Is this not the one from which my master drinks, which he regularly divines? You have done evil. So he catches up. In other words, like, where's my cup? He spoke those words to them, and they said, why does he say such things? We would never steal. Chas v'sholom. Here, look. The money that we found of our sacks, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan. How could we have stolen any silver or gold? Check. Anyone who if you find it, will die, and that person will die and will become avadim to you, will become slaves. So we know what happens in the story. He says, what you now say is also correct. The one with whom it is found will be the slave, and the rest of you will be free. So they lower the sacks, they open it up, they have a big search. You can imagine it's like a big scene. They have to get off their animals, and they have to open up their bags. They're like in customs, checking through their stuff, what's going on. They search. They began with the oldest, a very dramatic fashion. Again, they know exactly where it is. They start with the oldest, they go to the youngest, and lo and behold, we're at the end of the Parsha Miketz, and the goblet, the Kiddush cup, the becher is found in the case of Binyamin. So what do? Vayikre'u sim lo sam, they tear kriya, they rend their garments, and they have to get back, and then here we go. We have to go back. Now, look who comes first in Pasuk Yudaled, page 248. Vayavo Yehuda ve'echav. It's not Reuven, it's the leader is Yehuda. Yehuda comes with his brothers to the house of Yosef. He's still there, and he falls down in front of him. Vayomer lehem Yosef, ma ma'aseh hazeh asher asisem? Lo yidatem ki nachesh ish asher kamoni? He says, why did you do this to me? He says, don't you know that I can see things? I can practice, nachesh is witchcraft, wizardry, divination, whatever it is. Vayomer Yehuda. See, Yehuda says, what can we say? How can we speak? How can we justify ourselves? God has uncovered the sin of your servants. Here we are. We're ready to be slaves to you, both we and the one whose hand the goblet was found. Vayomer, he says, no, chas v'shalom. I'm not cruel. I just want the one who stole the goblet. The rest of you are free to go. End scene, end Parsha, end season, cliffhanger to be resumed next season in the fall season after the summer reruns. TV doesn't work like that anymore. Like, seasons have no season. They just, like, whenever they start and finish, and they release it all at once, and then you have to, like, stay home from work for 3 days so you could watch, the entire season of the House of Cards or Game of Thrones, whatever it is, right? That's how life is. Life has changed so much. We used to, like, revolve around season premieres, right? The dynasty cliffhanger. Oh, what happened with Blake Carrington? Am I dating myself? Pretty good. See, Vivian's laughing. I like that. See, that makes me see. See, we were at Dynasty House because we couldn't watch like Knots Landing because it was a Friday night show or Falcon Crest, whatever it was. Anyway, right? Dallas, yes. By the way, who did shoot JR? I don't know. Okay, so that's where we leave the Parsha. And it's all very necessary to build up till we get to this Parsha. Vayigash, I love Yehuda. Again, my favorite Parsha of the whole world. My bar mitzvah Parsha. Again, this Shabbos will be the 20th anniversary of my bar mitzvah landing. So Vayigash, I love Yehuda. And Yehuda approaches Vayomer bi Adoni daber na avdecha davar be'azim ve'al yichar b'cha b'avdech l'ki chamocha kefara. He approaches him and he says, if you please my Lord, may your servant speak a word in my Lord's ears, and let not your anger flare up at your servant, for you are like Paro. And then he goes on with his whole speech. Now, look at Rashi here. Rashi in the beginning of the page says, Val yichar apecha mikan ata lamed shediber elav kashos. From here we see that Yehuda began to speak harshly with, he doesn't realize that it's Yosef, but with Yosef, with this viceroy, individual person in charge, human. Okay, it seems like a very innocent Rashi, right? So the Orach Chaim's question on this is, and it's an excellent insight, is, and we tend to forget it because when we have the Parsha break, we kind of break from like what just happened. But if you look at it in a row, by the way, notice it's the same chapter. The chapter, even though there's a Parsha break with a stuma, but it goes from Pasuk Yud Zayin to Pasuk Yud Ches. It's not the beginning of a new chapter. We're still in chapter 44. What was the last thing we heard Yehuda say? Yehuda says, he speaks so respectfully, he speaks with contrition, he speaks with guilt, and he says, by the way, this is incorporated into our tefillah. We say it in the Tachnun prayer. What can we say? You're right. How can we there's nothing we can do. God has uncovered the sin of your servants. Here we are. We're ready to be slaves to you, my Lord. And the one in whom, and both we are, and the one in whom the goblet is found. And then all of a sudden, the next sentence from Yehuda is, he's speaking harshly. And matter of fact, the Medrash is very, very powerful. The Medrash says, I'm willing to go to battle. I'm going to fight you. I'm going to defeat you. I'm going to go to war with you. What happened? What changed in between them? So that's what the Orach Chaim is going to deal with. So I have it. Do you want me to put it on the screen or do you have it? Put it on the screen. Okay. I understood. That's the universal sign language for put it on the screen. Okay, got it. All right, so let me share in the screen. Okay, you see it?
Download from Safari.
It's on Safari, yeah.
Oh, is it possible to download it?
I
haven't figured it out.
You can print it. I mean, I probably. All right, there it is. You see it? Okay, so this is the Orach Chaim HaKadosh. Ma nomer la'adoni perish amira b'derech ritzoy. How can we talk? How can we speak? So you can read the translation here. The expression amira refers to mild talk, whereas I actually just read it in the Hebrew, in English. It did a decent job of the explanation here. Whereas the expression of dibur refers to aggressive, tough talk. Manomer manidaber. That's what we say. Vayomer, vayidaber. Vayidaber is a much stronger language. Okay, fine. When the brothers said manitz tadak, I don't like that spelling. This is not like Wikipedia. We can make corrections. Manitz tadak should be a test. It's one of those weird grammar rules where the test falls in. So you pronounce it properly. Okay, how can we justify ourselves? They refer to their defense in a court of law. They consider that all these trumped up charges were retribution by God. The time had come to pay for their guilt, inasmuch as they were all guilty vis-a-vis God. They offered themselves as slaves. So the first thing the Orach Chaim says is, why does Yehuda have this contrition? Again, it dates back to their aval ashemim anachnu. Aval ashemim anachnu, we are guilty. Everything that's happening, and this is such a Jewish way of thinking. When something bad happens to us, we say, God is punishing me for something. Right? God is saying, oh my God, you see, look, I wasn't nice to my mother. Hold on, I gotta let Dina in. There she is. I wasn't nice to my mother, and look what's happening. My kids aren't nice to me. Or I missed my train this morning. Oh, because I was late to davening. God is punishing me. I mean, you can go on and on and on and on. And we like to attribute, and maybe it makes us feel better if we know why good or bad things are happening to us. But it's a very human nature, but specifically a very Jewish thing to do. So they're saying, look, we sold our brother, and now it's all coming back to haunt us. And whatever's, because they know that they're innocent. And there's nothing worse than when you know you're innocent and you're being accused of something and you cannot fight the forces. You have no means of defending yourself. So what is he doing? He's not fighting. He's giving in, and he's saying, you know what? This is God. God is paying us back. Like we thought we would get away with it. We thought. Here we are. You know what? We just have to take our medicine, take our lumps, take the punishment, because this is all from God. Okay, so that's the first point of the Orach Chaim. That's a very, very important point, because it's going to be, and you'll see, and we're just going to actually just read into the Psukim and understand where Rashi is coming from. So it's also possible that when the brothers spoke of how can we justify ourselves, they referred to the disastrous discovery of the goblet in Benjamin's pouch. This fact had destroyed their collective defense that they had already proven their honesty by having returned the money they had found in their bags upon their return to Canaan. Alas, Benjamin had not been with them at the time. So in other words, like they thought they were in the clear. Manit Tzadok, there's nothing we could do to disprove this, because now, and who knows, maybe they even, is it possible? Maybe they even suspected Binyamin. Who knows? I don't know. We don't know. Anyway, Gam Anachnu, because the pasuk says, again, going back to the end of Miketz, he says, we will be avadim la'adoni, we will be slaves to our master, gam anachnu, gam asher nimtza hagavia biyado. So why does he have to say, we will be slaves, and also the one with whom the goblet was found? So look what the Orach Chaim says. The word gam may be understood as hagam, that even though the goblet has not been found in our pouches, inasmuch, now, because I'll say it to you outside, we'll say it inside. If they're saying that the reason why this is happening to us, these trumped up charges, and we're paying for it, is because of the sin of what we did to our brother, then it shouldn't involve Binyamin, because Binyamin wasn't there. He wasn't involved in that sale at all. As a matter of fact, they say that's why it's the children of Binyamin are the ones that could defeat the descendants of Esav, Amalek, etc., because they never bowed down to Esav, meaning the Binyamin never, when Yaakov met Esav, when Yaakov made Esav with all of his family, Binyamin was not yet born. So he never subjugated himself to Esav, so to speak. So he has this superpower. And then involved in the brothers, he wasn't involved in the brothers. And that's why the Beis HaMikdash, the portion of the Kodesh Kodashim, was always found in the territory of Binyamin, because he wasn't involved in this sort of fight between the brothers. And that's why it has to be a place of peace. So they're asking, wait a minute, if this is coming to punish us, what does it have to do with Binyamin? So they say, that's why it says, we will be slaves to you, and also the one with whom the goblet is found. And he's just going to get thrown into this. Why? Guilt by association, or you might call it guilt by osmosis. So look what the Orach Chaim says. Even though the goblet has not been found in our pouches, inasmuch as the sin of the brothers had been guilty of, did not include Binyamin at all, seeing I'd been too far young to participate in the sale of Joseph, they said, as well as the one in whose the pouch the goblet is found. They attributed Binyamin's having been found with the becher in his pouch as a misfortune that had befallen Binyamin only because he had traveled with sinners such as they. In other words, he's getting punished. It's like an insult to injury. We sinned, we're getting paid back for it. God is punishing us. And guess what? If you're in the same card as the sinners, you're gonna get in trouble too. Guilt by association. So Binyamin Nebuch, this is not a punishment for him per se, but the fact that he's with us now he's going to be punished. And they are accepting this upon themselves. And he quotes the Gemara. He says, we find a similar use of two apparently not only unrelated, but completely contradictory phenomena when the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, two dried out trees and a moist one, saying that when the dried trees go up in flames, even the green trees burnt up together with them. In other words, you know what? You have good people, you have bad people, but if good people are near bad people, when bad things happen, when bad things go down, guess what? They get swept up in it and they're going to get burned as well. Okay? Alternatively, and he gives another interpretation, the brothers shifted gears by no longer speaking about the person in whose pouch the goblet was found as being guilty of death, but gam anachnu, we too, meaning Binyamin was to be subject to the same penalty they had declared themselves as guilty of in verse 9, meaning slavery. They justified this by citing the fact that there were no witnesses to the actual theft. Benjamin was able to plead that he didn't know who placed the goblet in his pouch. Okay, but the main thing is, first of all, is that when Yehuda speaks, and he speaks with contrition, he's speaking not so much that we're guilty of this crime that you accuse us of, but he's willing to have them all sold into slavery, us and the one who gets thrown in, the baby in the bathwater, in, not out, right? Because of what we did to our brother Yosef. This is God paying us back. But look now, if you read now, we'll see it outside before we see it inside. But what does Yosef answer them? And this is why it's so important, the last pasuk in last week's Parsha. The last pasuk says, Vayomer, Yosef says, Chalilali. What? What do you think I am? I don't want to punish all of you. I want to punish only the guilty person. Ha'ish asher nimsa hagavir biyado hu yihi eli la'eved v'atem alu l'shalom el avichet. He says, what do you mean? What are you offering all you as slaves? You didn't do anything wrong to me. Only he did. Only Binyamin did. So now, from Yehuda's point of view, if he says the whole thing comes from God, and the reason why this is happening, and he's saying, I'm willing to accept the punishment on behalf of all of us because of what we did 22 years ago, and now we're going to pay for it, and this is what God wants. But then this person who's the agent of God says no. So it's showing Yehuda, wait a minute, this is not coming from God because he only wants Binyamin. And if he's only punishing Binyamin and not us, and we're really off scot-free, then what does that mean? That means that I can't battle with God. I'm not battling with God. I'm battling with a human being now. I'm battling with a regular king, Basar Vadam. And that's why in the beginning of Vayigash, Diber Itam Kashos. Now when he starts Vayigash, now he can say, okay, now I don't have to be so nice anymore, because now that I realize this is not a punishment from God, but rather this is you, Yosef being a shnuk, or whoever you are, Viceroy of Egypt, Tzafnas Paneach, Chavrech, whatever they call you. Now that happens, now I could turn on the jets, and now I could say, okay, now I'm going to defend my brother, and I'm going to fight for him. So that's why, you see, what changed between the end of last week's Parsha and the beginning of this week's Parsha, the tone, the demeanor of Yehuda, going from one of contrition now to one of battle. All of a sudden, he's self-righteous, and he's going to stand up. That last pasuk. The last pasuk changes everything, because Paro says, no, I don't want any of you. I only want Yosef. Now let's see what the Orach Chaim says inside. Okay, it's Chalila Lacha. If I would be disgraced if I would do such a thing, Joseph meant that even if it were true that God was using this opportunity to punish the brothers for some other sin, he wasn't authorized nor competent to administer such retribution. He was only authorized to deal with guilt, which was obvious to him. He was entitled to judge the person in whose possession the goblet had been found. The brothers were free to go home, however. Joseph thought that by allowing them all to go and by keeping only Binyamin as a slave, he had appeased Yehuda. He felt certain that Yehuda had accepted the verdict. How was he to know that Yehuda would immediately begin to lambast him, as is evident in the following verses? See, there he is. He says, the Orach Chaim, you can see the change in tone. He goes from someone who's going to subjugate himself to someone who's going to fight with him. According to our view, Yehuda reasoned with Yosef as long as he felt that they were all being punished for something they had done in the past. When he realized innocent Binyamin was being singled out for punishment, whereas they, the guilty ones, were allowed to go free, he realized that he didn't confront divine judgment in the person of Joseph, but that Joseph was a capricious ruler who had framed Binyamin for reasons of his own. There was therefore no cause for the brothers to submit to what they had previously considered as divine retribution. In other words, I will submit to divine retribution if I think it's divine retribution. But what's happening here, that is not divine retribution. Therefore, now I have to go to battle. Okay, so when we see this, okay, it really explains, it puts the psukim into proper reference, because now what's happening is Yehuda then goes to battle. But what's really, really happening? In other words, okay, that's nice. We could play devil's advocate. What would have happened? And this we don't know the answer to. What would have happened if Yehuda, instead of Vayigash love Yehuda, if he would have just said, okay, you keep Binyamin, we'll leave. They would have gone home to their father. The father most certainly would have had a heart attack. Yosef and Binyamin would ride off into the sunset and live happily ever after. Okay, that's possible, right? It's entirely possible. Plausible. I mean, does that make sense?
Like Joseph would have felt too guilty to do that. Like, think how like emotional he gets over these things. Like, I feel like he can't actually do it.
You don't think he can. See, you have such a Pollyannish view. I love that. It's such a like a pure view of Yosef. I mean, you're right, because he's very sensitive. He's always crying. He's always talking about God,
Like
which
right after this whole thing, he
right.
breaks,
So does but is that does Yosef want them to leave?
leave Egypt.
Yeah, like he's saying, you go back, because he's not expecting a battle. And certainly Or Chaim says he figured Yosef says, oh yeah, you didn't go on your way and we'll be fine, me and Yosef. Because maybe all he really wanted was Binyamin. Maybe at this point in time, he still harbors a tremendous amount of resentment and hatred, and he wants retribution. And what does he do? He develops this whole ruse by which now I have Binyamin. After all, Binyamin's his only quote unquote real brother. Binyamin's the only brother that didn't hurt him. Binyamin is the only brother that he is invested in because they share the same two parents, as opposed to the other ones. They only share one parent. And Binyamin would never do anything. Binyamin has no idea like who Yosef is even, probably. I mean, if they figure out if Binyamin's 30 now, that means that he was 8 when the whole thing went down. And how much does an 8-year-old know? I don't know. It's hard to say. Okay. But what changes? What changes is, and I think this is the crux of the whole story, which many of the Parsha really focus on, is that now, whereas the brothers threw Yosef and cast him aside, literally into a pit, now Yehuda steps up and is going to battle for his brother. Yehuda is willing to give up everything, even though Yehuda is now officially in the clear. Yehuda could go home with impunity from Egyptian law and from Yosef's wrath.
But not his father's wrath.
So we'll hold on to that thought. That's an excellent question, which Yosef will address. We'll see that in a minute. But what happens is that Yehuda then goes up and he gives this whole long speech. And what does he say? And that's exactly the reason. Look what he says. We said, because we can't do this to my father. I can't bring Binyamin because my father. Okay. And now if I go back to my father, bottom of the page on 251, if I go back to my father and he's not with us, because it's nafsho kshura b'nafsho, what's going to happen? He's going to see that he's missing. He's going to die. And then you will brought down the ordinance of your service to the grave. Right. So therefore I took responsibility. Yehuda follows through. He guaranteed the safety of, like the Molinari brothers guaranteed the safety of Fredo. He guaranteed the safety. That's in number 2. He guaranteed the safety of Yehuda, of Binyamin to his father, and he kept his word, which is why, by the way, Yehuda is the leader, because the leader has to admit he was wrong. The leader has to give his word, and he has to keep his word. Okay, and he has to step up and fight when necessary. He has to be contrite when necessary, but he has to do the right thing. He says, therefore, let me stay instead of Binyamin. Okay, how can I go up to my father if he's not with me? I can't see this evil happen to my father. Now, the beginning of chapter 45, what happens? Yosef, he couldn't hold himself back. And he says, tell everyone to leave. No one's with him. And what does he do? He cries. Again, he cries because it's like Miriam said, even though there's maybe the midas hadin within a person, at a certain point, there has to be a midas harachamim. There's an emotional aspect of the human psyche which takes over. And for Yosef, thankfully, it dominates his thinking at this point, which we always say sometimes it's not good to think emotionally, but sometimes it actually is good to think emotionally. Halavai, people should do it a little bit more. Okay, so he thinks emotionally, and he says, and he cries, and everybody hears him crying, and then he has this fateful pasuk, Vayomer Yosef elachav ani Yosef ora v'chai v'lo yachol lechol v'anos asukini v'al mipanav. He says to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But the brothers couldn't answer him because they were left disconcerted before him. Nifhalu really means like Behala is like in shock. A huge surprise is Behala. We say it in Uvalat Zion every single day. Now, going back to what Gail said, now Yehuda very much mentioned the what about my father? And that's the driving factor for Yehuda. And that's exactly, so Yosef, even though he works hard to put the family back together, which I don't know if any of us in that position would do that necessarily, because when you've been hurt, it's very hard to say, yeah, I undo that hurt and I forgive you, let alone let's all live happily ever after together. It's one thing to like, we could agree to be in the same room versus I never want to see you again versus let's be best friends. There's a lot of distance in between all of those things. Okay. The Yosef says, he asks a question. And this is the famous word of the Beis Halevi. And the Beis Halevi here says, Yosef says, I am Yosef, your brothers, is my father alive? And they couldn't answer him. So the Beis Halevi asks, he says, what do you mean is my father alive? They've been talking for like 9 million years about my father and the younger brother and my father's. What did he ask? Is my father alive? So he wasn't asking him factually, is my father alive? He's giving them, even though, again, he's the one putting the family back together and he's being a good guy here, but it never stops to give a little bit of musr along the way. And the Medrash says here, woe is to us the day of judgment, woe is to us the day of rebuke. He gave such a rebuke that sometimes you get such a musr, such a rebuke that there's actually nothing you can answer. You just have to be, they got you dead to rights. And there's nothing you can do. Like, there's just nothing to say. He says to them, I am Yosef, your brother. Is my father alive? You're going on and on, Yehuda, about you don't want to risk Binyamin because of what it'll do to my father, of how it's going to hurt him, how he's going to cause him to die. Did you think about that when you got rid of me? Ani Yosef. When I'm Yosef, Odavichai, did you think Odavichai is my father going to live? Did you think about that when you threw me in the pit? Now, granted, they have come a long way since then. And granted, they have learned a lot, experienced a lot, and they felt a lot. But Yosef still doesn't stop him from giving the musr, which he's fully entitled to. Fully entitled to. There's no question about it. Some might say that he's even too nice to them. Okay. And they finally, they kind of reunite, and that's what happens here. But the key part here of understanding is what changes in Yehuda's mindset. And I think this Orach Chaim HaKadosh is so key in helping us understand the Pesukim and how we transition from speaking with contrition, moving over to speaking with battle cry. What changes is that he realizes that maybe we're not being punished because of God, and this is just an individual being cruel to us, and therefore I have to go to battle. And that may be the tipping point for Yosef Hatzadik to realize that maybe now is the time that I could put them back. Because why didn't he reveal himself earlier? For better or for worse. Like, reveal himself and say, now I'm going to kill you. Or reveal himself and say, bring Binyamin or I'm going to kill you. I'm like, why go through all this? Because maybe Yosef had to see for himself, are they really different? Because even though when people, we always have this, when people, go through some sort of rehabilitation or whatever it might be for, there's always kind of like a nagging, lagging question in your mind, like, do they really mean it? Like, are they really changed? If you remember, we had Erica here the last time she was here. We did around Rosh Hashanah. She's here the Shabbos, by the way. We're doing a really cool thing on Friday night after Friday night davening. We're gonna have like a little Oneg Kiddush, since Shabbos starts at like lunchtime. So we're gonna have a little Oneg Kiddush and a learning session, which will be done by 6 p.m. So you'll be home still in bed by 8, with a full Shabbos dinner. But she's going to discuss ethical wills, which is a really, really important topic, for a lot of reasons. But, so when you're discussing, you have a breakup and, couples break up and they apologize and like, do you really mean it? Like, do I know that the behavior's changed? So maybe Yosef has to go through that as well. And he has to really decide for himself, like, yeah, I'd love to be able to put this family back together, but do I have what to work with? Or should I just take Binyamin and we'll call it a day and that's it? And by the way, so you ask also about the father. The question is always asked, why didn't Yosef write home? It's not until this whole episode, and this is the opinion of modern Parshanut. It was made famous by Rav Yoel Ben Nun in Gush, if I'm not mistaken, in his seminal piece where he says that Yosef probably didn't realize his father was alive all that time. He figured, how can my father survive that? He's probably, there's that opinion, but his take on it is that, all right, I'm sorry, I'm confusing it with other thing. A lot of people thought that. Rabbi Ben Nun's piece was that he said that Yosef maybe had an inkling that his father was in on it. That's really something. That's something to study another time. Remind me, maybe next year. But he has this notion. It's very convincing, because if you're looking at, again, through text, that maybe he says, why would his father send him down there? He knows the brothers hate him. Like, what? Maybe his father, that was his way of dealing with. Because remember, when he gave the dreams, his father didn't say anything. Aviv Shamar Sadavar. He didn't give his approval or his disapproval. He didn't say anything. Maybe his father was in on it. So maybe he didn't write home because he figured that his father was part of it. Now he realizes that's not the case. So a lot of things change, not only for Yehuda and his brothers, but a lot changes for Yosef. And that's why his emotion takes over. And when his emotion takes over, this is what happens. So again, I wanted to just, this is such an important parsha. Again, this is the turning point of the family of Bereshis. There are 4 parshas dedicated to this family. And by the way, you talk about, do people really change? What happens in next week's parsha when Yaakov dies? The brothers, they wonder if Yosef really changed. They wonder if Yosef is just waiting for the old man to kick off, and then he's going to take revenge, which is a very natural reaction to that. And say, okay, now that dad's dead, now you're going to kill us, right? Now, and he's like, yeah, sure. No, that's not the case. Okay, so we'll leave that till next time. But it's really, really interesting. It's a phenomenal piece of the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, which he says in a couple of places. So hold on to that. It's just and by the way, it helps us understand Rashi and helps us understand the flow of the Psukim. So I hope everybody has a great day, and God willing. So Monday night we'll have. There's going to be a yard side shiur, but Tuesday we'll have a regular shiur, God willing, which will also be on the yard side, so we could learn in memory of. Shelly, if you hang on for 1 second, I want to ask you one thing, okay? All right, everybody have a great day. Take care.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday. Are you laning this Shabbos?
I sure am.